Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John. I am the event coordinator at Murder by the Book here in Houston, coming to you from my living room. And tonight we are joined by Jennie Fields, whose new book, Atomic Love, just came out last week or this week?
It came out on Tuesday.
On Tuesday. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So if you guys are new to Jennie's books, Jennie Fields received an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and is the author of the novels Lily Beach, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, The Middle Ages, and The Age of Desire. The Chicago native, Fields was inspired by her own mother's work as a University of Chicago trained biochemist in the 1950s. She now lives with her husband in Nashville, Tennessee. If you guys are watching on Facebook, if you have any questions for Jennie, you can drop those in the comments. I will be monitoring those and relaying those to her after we've chatted. And also wanted to mention before I forget, Jennie was kind enough to send us some signed book plates. So if you order your copy of Atomic Love from us, we will have a signed book plate in it for you. So to get us started, Jennie, real easy to start with. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Atomic Love?
Right, so Atomic Love is about a woman who worked on the Manhattan Project in Chicago during the war. And the Manhattan Project was where they created the atomic bomb. And this particular woman worked on the portion of the project, particularly where they created the first atomic reaction, which, believe it or not, was done under the University of Chicago, right in the heart of an incredibly busy city, and could have been a disaster, and thank heavens it wasn't. So after the bombs were dropped, she was deeply, deeply despairing that she had had a part in this, and really had a nervous breakdown. And her colleague and lover left her and betrayed her. So she lost her job. It's 1950. It's a few years later. She's living in Chicago. And she is working at Marshall Field's department store selling antique jewelry. And the man who betrayed her starts to try and reach her again. He's trying to call her. And she's approached by the FBI, who tell her that they want her to spy on him. They want her to see him because they believe he's selling atomic secrets to the Russians.
One of the things I thought was interesting in the marketing that the publicist sent over was an interview that you did. And you said one of the most surprising things to you when you're doing some of the research was that the scientists actually thought that like this bomb would rip a hole like in the atmosphere and like destroy the whole world. It's crazy to me that they would even like keep going with any of that.
They really did not know, especially when they got to the Trinity test, which was the test that they did before they actually used the bomb on Hiroshima. And it's really frightening to think. They thought it might ignite the atmosphere. They just did not know. So everybody was waiting to find out. You can't even imagine that they went ahead with it. The other thing people don't realize is that many, many scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project signed a petition called the Szilard petition to Harry S. Truman, begging him not to drop the bombs. They were hoping when they created the bomb, because they knew the Germans were working on the bomb, and they were hoping that they would just use it as a bargaining chip. And it would be, you've got the bomb, we've got the bomb. It would be a deterrent from using it. And so they sent this petition to Harry S. Truman, and it never got there because his Secretary of State did not believe in it. So he just withheld it. And Truman not only dropped the bomb once, but twice.
I can't even imagine having that conversation. So we think this is going to ignite the atmosphere, but we're going to go ahead and try it anyway. What's the worst that could happen?
What's the worst that can happen? We'll see you in the next life on some other planet.
Right. So I also read that you had some real life inspirations for the character of Rosalind and Weaver. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, to begin with Rosalind, my mother was a scientist, and right after she was trained during the war, and she was a scientist right after the war. She was a biochemist, and she always told me that she did some important cancer research and that her name was one of the few names on a very important cancer paper. And I always thought this might be apocryphal. And just this week, a friend of mine did some research and said, your mother was real, her name really was on an important cancer paper. And that cancer paper was referred to all the way well into the 1960s, which is just remarkable to me. But anyway, so she had to give up her job when she got married. People did not think that married women should work, especially after the war. GIs came back and, you know, they just thought, give the jobs to the men. And she regretted that deeply all her life. So the idea of somebody parted from her love of science was something I wanted to write about. And then her cousin worked on some kind of lab at the University of Chicago, and she would not talk to my mother about it. And they were best friends. They walked every day to the University of Chicago, where my mother also had her job after the war. But during the period when the war was going on, her cousin still, you know, would not say a word to her. And she didn't find out till years later she worked on the Manhattan Project. She was a clerical worker, but it still, I see your cat. She was a clerical worker, but she worked on the Manhattan Project and she was sworn to secrecy. So those were two impetuses for it. And then also I discovered with some research that there really was a man who was a spy at the University of Chicago. In fact, there may have been two. One definitely, and he was never caught. And the reason we know this for sure now is because of the Venona Project. Do you know what the Venona Project is?
Oh.
So during the war, they actually were able to decode Russian messages, but they didn't want the Russians to know they'd broken their code. And so they could not arrest anyone unless they found other information that proved that they were guilty, and they knew this man was guilty. He knew he was being followed and watched, and his house bugged, and so he ended up moving to England, and he spent the rest of his life in England as a professor, and he never was caught.
Wow. So because, you know, you said, you know, she couldn't talk about the project at all. How are you able to do research? Has some of that stuff been declassified for you to look into it?
Yes, just like the Venona Project, it's all been declassified now. And there's some really wonderful books about how the atom bomb was made. Richard Rhodes, The Making of the Atom Bomb, is kind of the masterwork there, but I read other books as well. I read books about atomic spies, and there was a lot of information that's now available to everybody. One was called Bombshell, about this man who lived in Chicago and was a spy.
And you read a diary by a woman that actually worked on the project too, didn't you?
Yeah, so there was a single woman who worked on that part of the project. She was a very well-known and respected physicist, and she was the youngest member of the project. I mean, she was just in her 20s when she worked on it. Her name was Leona Woods, and she wrote memoirs about her life. She, like Rosalind, married a colleague, and, you know, she went on and did many things with physics over the years. But she was somebody who was definitely an inspiration to me.
I also read that some of the research that you do when you're working on a project is that you also try to read novels that are set in the time period that you're working on. So what did you read for this one?
Oh dear. Now you see, when people ask me, what books have you read? I completely blank out. But I did. Trust me, I read a number of them. I can't remember. I'd have to look back through my books. Sorry. But, you know, I will tell you, one of the most interesting things I read that really, really affected the book was I read oral histories of men who were in the prisoner of war camps in Japan. And they were just so vivid, and they were very painful to read. It was just a horrible, horrible time. And they influenced my character, Charlie, quite a bit, because I knew I wanted Charlie to have been a prisoner of war in the Japanese camps. And he has PTSD. He is deeply, deeply affected by what happened to him there.
So did you always know that you were going to include kind of chapters from kind of Charlie's perspective as well as kind of Roz's story as well?
I didn't know that in the very, very beginning, but pretty early on, I knew I wanted an alternate point of view, and I do find that's really helpful. And I really loved writing Charlie's chapters. I mean, he has such an interesting backstory. He's born and raised in the Polish neighborhoods in Chicago, and a lot of people don't realize there are more Poles in Chicago than there are out of any city outside of Warsaw, and that includes any other city in Poland. I mean, it's really extraordinary, and I wanted him to have that background. I wanted him to be somebody who had a strong moral compass and who had, experienced a lot of grief in his life, and is fearful of relationships and women.
One of the things that I really loved about the book too was that both Charlie and Roz are kind of these loners who are out there on their own, but that they also had these really great family units to support them too. I thought that the relationship between Roz and her sister and Charlie and his sister were also really beautifully written.
Yeah, I wanted those families to, not just be adjunctive characters, but to have a real tale to them too. And, and one of my themes was that women were disenfranchised in that period. And both sisters were people who could embody what that meant to women at that time. So they were people that really grew as I wrote the book. I tend to write in layers and learn my characters as I go along. And I didn't really understand. I just knew Louisa was unhappy, but I didn't really understand why she was unhappy. And that all just came clear to me the more I wrote.
Yeah, and I like that, between the three, between Louisa and Rosalind and Charlie's sister, like you said, you're kind of talking about the disenfranchisement of women, but that you were able to kind of come at it from different ways from each of their perspectives too.
Yeah, well, I think that was necessary. I didn't want it to be the same drum that I was beating in all cases,
Mm-hmm.
And, Rosalind, she is somebody who survives. I mean, even when she's working in her job at Marshall Field selling jewelry, she still knows a lot about the jewelry. She's somebody who functions, who keeps going, even when it's just incredibly miserable. Whereas Louisa just kind of really held her anger in. And Charlie's sister is somebody who doesn't believe, she isn't quite sure she has a place in the world, but really would like one. Mm-hmm. So it's a chance for me to kind of examine all those different people.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the research that you did into the spy gadgets, like yes. The camera and the bugs?
It was hard to find information. I really spent a lot of days looking for that. It was fascinating because, I called all the spy museums and they just couldn't help me very much. I was hoping they would. But I did find some books finally that told me that bugs in those days, when you were bugging someone's apartment or whatever, had to be wired. And so, they didn't really have batteries that were capable of lasting very long, certainly not as long as they would have had to have lasted. So they got wired into light fixtures and things like that. And, it wasn't an easy job to bug an apartment in those days. And then I found out about this Miniphone, which was a German implement that you could wear, but it had 3 different batteries in it and it weighed a ton. I mean, it probably weighed, 20 pounds or something around your neck, and you were trying to pretend you were fine and you were wearing a wire. So, it was fascinating because, we just take for granted that things like transistors existed, but they didn't exist that far back. They did in about 2 to 3 years after that. They did start coming into their own, but they weren't available then.
I was surprised when they were talking about bugging, like you said, that the bugs had to be wired, but then also just when you're talking about like the size of them, like they were like the size of a pack of cigarettes, because you wouldn't imagine, everything's so tiny now that, you could stealthily put wire something stealthily into somebody's apartment that's that size that they would potentially just not notice.
It's really ridiculous. And yet they did. Just like they bugged that man who they knew was a spy, but they never got any information from him to be able to arrest him. And they were the size of a pack of cigarettes. And I imagine in the kind of glass light fixtures that they would have on the ceilings, you could set it in there and wire it into the wires. It's just, but imagine if somebody had to change a light bulb.
Yeah.
What would happen? They'd find them. So it was a precarious thing, and they were extremely expensive. And the Russians were way ahead of the Americans in bugging equipment too. So
We talked a little bit about what you kind of were reading when you were researching. I know you said like when you ask about books, it kind of goes. So who do you read when you're not researching?
Well, I recently read Lily King's Writers and Lovers, and I just thought that was a fantastic book. I really loved that. I read, I was asked by the Wall Street Journal, what's your favorite spy novel? And I completely blanked. I couldn't think of anybody except for, I could think of Le Carre, but I never didn't really relate entirely to Le Carre.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to write about James Bond, who I related to when I was 11, but probably wouldn't now. So I picked up a book by William Boyd called Restless, which
Mhm.
was really a fantastic book about a woman who's trained to be a spy. And it's emotional and complex. And I just thought it was a terrific book. I really enjoyed reading that.
He's a big favorite with my coworker Brenda, who works at the bookstore with me.
Oh,
So what drew you to this time period? We see so much historical fiction now that's set kind of during like kind of interwar period or World War II. What made you choose this time period?
I'm really glad you asked me that question. A lot of people write historical novels about the World War II. It's just become so popular that it's a little bit outwritten at this point. I'm sure there's more to delve into, but this period really fascinated me because it was a period when people came home from a lot of pain and trouble and worry, and they wanted to be happy. They thought they should just get married and have kids and it would all be great. Except that underneath it all, a lot of men had PTSD. Relationships that had happened before the war were changed because the people had changed over the term of the war. Women were disenfranchised and unhappy and didn't know really. Suddenly you're sent off to be a homemaker. Isn't that great? You can have babies and coffee clutches and you can learn to make coffee cake, and it's just they weren't so happy. They were supposed to be happy. So, there was all this cultural pressure to be the Leave It to Beaver family and have children, and there was a lot of unhappiness underneath that. And I really wanted to write about that era. I thought it was a fascinating era and a fresh era. And the Cold War is something that is as much about good and evil as the of World War II, but you just don't think of it that way. So it just really fascinated me.
Yeah, it was nice to read something that was kind of Cold War era, kind of early Cold War era that wasn't sort of the kind of Martin Cruz Smith, like fast paced, like spy flying all over the world stuff, and to actually see it kind of, I guess, kind of on our home turf.
Right. And it's much more quiet and much more character driven than usually those sort of books would be, because I think it really is about people who are trying to figure out what's the right thing to do. Where do they belong in the world? All of those characters, I think, are trying to figure out where they belong in the world. Even Weaver, who betrayed her, and even Weaver, who did things that he now regrets, are people who don't really know where they belong, who they are anymore.
So, in your previous novel, The Age of Desire, you were writing about Edith Wharton and kind of a fictionalized version of her. So, can you talk a little bit about kind of the challenges of writing a person who existed like that versus kind of characters that you're able to kind of loosely base on people, but kind of do whatever you want with?
I'm also really happy you asked me that question because I loved writing about Edith Wharton. She is my favorite author in the world. I just adore her. And she left just myriad diaries and letters to her lover. I wrote about the period when she was 45 and she fell in love with a younger man and had this passionate affair. And nobody ever thinks of Edith Wharton that way. And I really wanted to write about that. The hard part was that Edith Wharton, when she fell in love, became like a 16-year-old. I mean, she just lost her dignity entirely. And she was one of the most dignified women you can ever imagine. So it was painful for me to write about that. It was like, Edith, don't do this. But I had no choice. I had to tell the story. I felt it was my responsibility to tell the true story. So in this case, when it was time to write a new book, I thought, you know what? I want to have control over my own characters and what they do. So it was actually more pleasurable for me to write this in some ways, as much as I do love Edith.
So when you're writing, are you do you sit down with an outline and plot everything out, or do you kind of discover what's going on as you're writing?
I never outline. I feel like if I knew where I was going, I wouldn't want to write the book. I do, however, try to create some insoluble problem that my characters can resolve out of their own character. And that's important to me, to have some kind of conflict I understand, but I don't know what's going to happen. And if I did know what was going to happen, I'd be bored out of my mind writing it, and I do admire people who can outline it all. I'm just not one of those people.
Another thing that I loved about the book is that you set it in Chicago, and when Rosalind takes her niece to the Chicago Art Institute, they get to go visit the Thorn Rooms, which I've never gotten to see, but it's definitely on my bucket list to go see them. There is a really wonderful middle grade series by Marianne Malone called The 68 Rooms, and it's about these two children that sneak into the museum and they shrink down at night and they can run around and explore all of the different rooms.
I love that. That's so wonderful, because I just have loved the Thorn Room since I was a child.
So for our viewers who aren't watching, can you tell them a little bit about the Thorn Rooms?
So the Thorn Rooms are these miniaturized rooms that are perfect in every single detail. The carpets are woven. The lighting is exactly as it would be from windows and skylights and whatever would be in that room. And they're of different time periods. And, there's no people in them. They're just waiting for you to walk right into them. And as a child, they're like the best doll houses in the whole world, And, they even have things like silver candlesticks made out of silver. And, artisans who were brilliant made these rooms. And they have rooms, from every era you can imagine, right up till the 1930s with the modern period. They have an incredible modern lounge from Paris, and from different parts of the world as well. And it's just a dream to go in there and spend time, and you never want to leave. It's just a wonderful place to bring a child, but also for anyone to go to.
Yeah, when they were talking about their outing and they were going, I was like, oh, I hope they visit the Thorn Rooms. And then you popped them in there. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good.
Well, you have to go, by the way. You must go to the Thorn Rooms.
Yeah. So we have a question from Bryce in the comments. He says, with all of your research into spy crafting and spy technologies, if you needed to, who would you spy on and why, past or present?
Oh, Lord. Well, I'd probably spy on the present administration and find out what's really going on, I suppose. I don't know how to answer that. It's an interesting question, though.
So what do you think, because this is your fifth book, is that correct? Fifth?
It's my fifth book.
And so they've all been kind of standalone novels. What do you think that your books all have in common?
I think that all my books are about women trying to find their place in the world. Every single one of them, even the Edith Wharton book. I think it's very clear where men stand in the world, or much more clear. I suppose that you could certainly write about that as a man. But the role of women is constantly being challenged and changing. I don't know if you remember in this book, but she works in the lab and nobody listens to her at first. Mm-hmm. She's the only woman and she's the youngest and nobody hears her. And she learns she has to lower her voice because when she speaks in a woman's octave, it renders her unhearable. They just don't hear her. And when women get upset, their voices get higher and they, and men just block it out. They just do. And I learned this because I was in advertising for 32 years and I was a creative director and I needed to be heard. So I learned to lower my voice. And the more upset I was, the quieter I got, because if you got very quiet, people would lean towards you and try and hear you and this room would get silent. It wasn't a remarkable discovery of power. And I wanted her to find that. So it's hard for a woman to know, does she have a place in a man's world and how to make it happen? How to make it a woman's world. I mean, those are all things that I have women discovering.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Like you said, that the point where she starts lowering her voice because it's not something that I would have, as a man, would have ever even thought about. So I thought that was really interesting. Um, can you tell us a little bit about choosing the title?
The title came to me really early on, and I really didn't know why I chose it at the time. It just felt right. It is a book about the atomic bomb. It is a book about love. But at the same time, I kind of discovered that the word atomos, which is the Greek word for atom, it means indivisible. And I love the idea that they thought you could not divide the atom. And of course, what is the atom bomb? It's about splitting the atom, but but it seems to me that love should be indivisible. That if it's true, that if you really can come together and heal each other, that you become indivisible as a couple. And so I just thought Atomic Love really absorbed all of those thoughts.
It's a perfect title. So I'm surprised that you had one that you were able to kind of use, because so much you hear from authors that like they come up with a title and it has to potentially be changed. So that's great that it was that right off the bat.
It may be the only one that's never been changed. Actually, I think, no, I had two others that didn't have to be changed, but yes, I've been through that, so I know what you mean.
And can you tell us a little bit about the cover too?
Yeah, well, I said to my editor, I really don't want a woman from the back, because that's exactly what the Age of Desire was. And we looked at all sorts of things, and I just was so unhappy with them. And then they found this, and it was Chicago lights in the background. It's got the wonderful, wonderful blackboard equations on the side, which you can't see in the TV screen. But I love that because it spoke of science. And she's standing there looking somewhat powerful and ready to step into her life. And it's really grown on me. And I have to say, a lot of people say they really like it. So I guess we have a woman from the back.
But you have a woman who has the top of her head, which is growth, because for a long time, all the historical fiction novels were like women from like here down, and they didn't have tops of her head. So
or sometimes you just see eyes. That's another thing. They don't want to show faces because they don't want you to, or sometimes you just see the lower part of their face. They don't want you to say, oh, that can't be me, that's her. They don't want to imagine what she looks like. And that's what that's about.
Yeah. And she's also not wearing a red coat either. That's also a very big cover trend too. So you dodged two bullets there. She has a head and she's not wearing a red coat.
I feel so proud. She does have a red hat on though, actually.
Oh, she does.
It's pretty subtle though. And that was my choice. I could have chosen no red hat, but it needed something. So we went with the red hat.
So Tricia asks, what time period from the perspective of the female journey do you most want to write about that you haven't gotten to explore yet?
Well, in my new book that I'm just starting, so it will change, no doubt, I'm looking at the civil rights movement. From the 1960s, particularly the lunch counter sit-ins here in Nashville. And that's an era that really interests me because it was a real shakeup of society and a lot of concern and worry and confusion among the populace and people standing up for their rights, which is very similar to what we're experiencing right now. And it fascinates me.
So, this book is set in Chicago, and I know that you lived there for a while. Was being able to write Chicago like being able to kind of come back home again?
In a way it was. I really love Chicago. I mean, I don't think Chicago gets written about very often. You see books about New York constantly. And I lived in New York for 25 years, so I know New York very well. But Chicago is this incredibly unpretentious city. You are who you are. You don't put on any airs. You don't try to be who you're not. And I admire it for that. And it's also an incredibly beautiful city. If you've never been there, you really have to go.
Yeah, I've never been. It's definitely a place that I want to visit, and I've got lots of friends that are always mentioning that I need to come check it out. So when we are able to travel again.
Yes, right.
So what has this situation with the coronavirus been like for you as a writer? Have you been able to like actually sit down and get some work done, or is it just kind of too distracting with everything going on?
I am just like everybody else. I'm in sort of a weird panic mode where I don't write as well. I'm distracted. It's hard. And I think, I think the hardest part for me, of course, is that I'm launching a book during this period when I would normally go on a big book tour.
Mhm.
And, and I was supposed to go on a big book tour in England as well. And, it's all just kind of up in the air now. We're just doing what we can. And, my publisher's been just terrific and I don't have any complaints. But you don't know if books are going to reach people. What I heard is that people are reading a lot of books they already knew before the pandemic, but they're not checking out the new books. And so if you're out there listening, check out the new books. There's a lot of writers who spent 5 years writing a book who want you to discover their books. So be kind.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing about being able to, because like I was telling you before we got started, like at the moment the store is still closed for browsing, so people can't come in. And there's all this stuff, like what we kind of talk about, those hand sell books that are sort of like, the candy by the cash register that you didn't come in for, but we're like, hey, you need to pick these up. It's at the moment, it's not the easiest to get those in the hands of people. So we're definitely missing that. Was there any talk about postponing the release date for the book?
We did indeed talk about it. And then we realized that if we did wait, we would hit a logjam of other books that have also decided to jump ahead. And that maybe it was better to come out now when there were less books being released at the same time. And but nobody knows. Everybody's just trying to guess at this point. It's such an odd time. Maybe when the paperback comes out, we'll all be out in the world again, but I wouldn't count on it. I mean, who knows how long we'll be experiencing this pandemic. So
yeah, we there was, when stuff kind of just started shutting down, and a lot of stuff was getting postponed, so there was like a period in like kind of June, early July, where we're like, why are there no new books out? But it was because everything had gotten pushed later in the fall. And I've seen somewhere like in the UK that they had moved some stuff around. So like early September, there's like an obscene amount of books that are all kind of coming out at the same time. So
including mine. It's coming out in mid-September. So we'll see what happens, but I think it's good. There's going to be a real logjam even into the, pre-Christmas.
yeah.
It's really hard to tell.
Yeah, and it's tough too, because then, as you get further, and especially this year with it being an election year, if you push too far into the fall, the closer you get to the election, the more like people just don't pick up as much fiction. So it's definitely a weird time.
It's funny because that was what I thought would be my biggest concern is, gee, I don't want it to come out right around the election. That's like worrisome. That could be bad. Now that's the least of my worries,
Yeah. So we're getting some more questions from the comments. So Bryce asked, what books do you enjoy when you're not researching, or what genre do you tend to gravitate towards?
I really do like historical fiction. I just picked up, and I haven't really begun it, Fiona Davis's The Lions of Fifth Avenue I want to read, which is about a family who lives in the Fifth Avenue Library, which I can't wait to read that because I used to pass that library and go into that library all the time when I lived in New York. And I'm reading Rachel Barenbaum's A Bend in the Stars about a physicist in Russia at the, right before the revolution. And so, I do like to read that. Like I said, I read Lily King's Writers and Lovers, which was I just love well-written books. I enjoyed my friend Ann Patchett's book, The Dutch House is a special book. Also, it's funny because nobody thinks of that as a historic novel, and yet it is from another time period.
You're in for such a treat with the Fiona Davis. We're all huge fans of hers at the store, and we're so thrilled that Good Morning America has just picked this new book, and this new one's one of my favorites of them. And if you guys are watching on Facebook, we chatted with Fiona and Suzanne Rindell last week. So if you go back through the videos, you can check out that video.
I'm going to go back through the videos and check out that video myself.
Yeah. Fiona's parents live fairly close, not fairly close to the bookstore, but they live in a suburb of Houston. So we get to see her periodically when she pops in. So Trisha asks, what is the best part of a book tour? She says she's always been curious about that process.
And this is really what I miss. That's a nice question, Trisha, because what I really miss is looking my readers in the eyes and being able to connect and to see what they look like when I answer questions and to do a little bit of reading from the book and see if they respond. And, I really miss that. I miss that
Yeah.
connection. It's something, writers live in little tiny, rooms working all day long for years. I worked on this for 5 years. So, you want to go out there and see the world, and it's disappointing to not be able to do that when it was planned from the beginning.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we miss is just being able to kind of watch people have those interactions with authors. And, we've been doing this for so long, getting to see people kind of on their, every couple of years schedule. It's like getting to visit with friends and family and not being able to see people. It's hard.
Yeah, it really is. And I miss meeting the booksellers. It's just wonderful to meet booksellers who tell me, I just read your book. I love it. I can't wait to hand sell it and to have that connection and to know their faces. And I've made friends with booksellers. I've made friends with librarians across the country in my last book tour that I'm still friends with them. We write each other. I just had a friend from the Omaha Public Library come visit me, and that's just wonderful. And I really am going to miss that.
Yeah. So Bryce asks, when you're traveling for book tour or just traveling in general, are you of the I'm going to travel with a giant stack of books person, or are you an e-reader person?
Okay, I'm going to tell you my dirty secret. When I
Uh-oh.
travel, I always have ebooks because when I finish one, I don't want to feel like, oh no, I don't have another. And I am not somebody who wants a heavy suitcase. I may be the world's lightest packer. I traveled so many times when I was in advertising that I am platinum for life on American, meaning I flew 2 million miles. I pack really, really light. So yes, I am an ebook reader. I can't help it. But I do have stacks of books. I just was at Parnassus and grabbed a bunch of books. I love real books. And, just looking at your bookshelf behind you makes me want to what's there? I want to see what's there. And books are special. They speak to you. They smell good. And, I have to say that my publisher did such a beautiful job on this book. They put these really cool Art Deco dingbats in between the little sections. And they did this amazing frontispiece, dark noir picture of Chicago at night, which I just love. And, it's to experience that in a real book is special, I think.
Yeah, I'm luckily as a bookseller, since we get advanced reader copies when I travel, I just take a stack of them with me because that way, as I finish something, I can just kind of leave it wherever I am. But one of the things that the pandemic has kind of forced me a little bit more than I was before, and definitely some of the other staff members, is publishers just weren't able to do as many get ARCs out to booksellers as well as they were, which is also
as an ARC either. So I relate.
Yeah, so just because they could, if they were, they couldn't get into the warehouse where they were to get them to ship them out. So luckily, your publicist she not only sent me the ebook so I could read it as soon as finished copies were available. She sent me an e-copy or a physical copy so I could actually read it. So yeah, that's been a tricky part of it, but it's definitely pulled me personally into ebooks a little bit more than I was before.
Yeah. Well, I was so sad because I was really looking forward to the ARC because I'm a person who never prints out their book ever.
Oh.
I don't waste any paper on my book. It's all in the computer. So I was just dying to hold it, the book in my hand and look at it on the page. And it never happened, right? The pandemic hit right when they were about to print the ARCs, and we never had ARCs. We just had e-ARCs. So. And for people who don't know, that's the advanced readers copies that are sent to bookstores and reviewers and people like that.
So you mentioned, you had worked on this book for 5 years, and I was looking at publication schedule, and you haven't necessarily been a 1 book a year writer, but this was a little bit longer gap. So what was this book just harder to write, or were there other things going on?
No, I wrote another book, which I finished and haven't done anything with whatsoever. It just wasn't the right book, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I've actually, a friend read it and said, are you kidding? Get this book out there. But, I don't know. I mean, it no longer interested me, and I just got drawn into this idea, and I just fell in love with this idea, and I wanted to put heart and soul into it. So the first 3 years I was doing that other book, and then this one, um, it it took longer. I don't know why it took longer, but they do tend to take me about 5 years. I'm not a book a year writer, and I wish I could be Fiona Davis. She just seems to be able to get them out there. I admire that.
Yeah, it's tricky. You know, we live in a world now where everybody's used to kind of just being able to kind of binge everything or have kind of content kind of constantly. So I imagine as a writer, it's kind of hard to know that you have to take your time with the process, and then also kind of be aware that there are so many other people that are just kind of, I don't want to say cranking stuff out, because I know that even the people that do it a book a year, there's still a lot of effort that goes into it. But
Yeah, some people, when I was younger, I wrote faster. I'm more critical of myself now, so I write more slowly. And let's face it, social media slows us down.
yeah.
I really should just pull the plug, but I don't, because I have lived in many different lives in many different cities, and that's how I connect to the people that I love, through Facebook and Insta and things like that. So it takes time, let's face it.
Yeah. So how did you know that that book that you were working on, that you had spent 3 years on, how did you know that that wasn't like that you were going to put that aside and pick something else up? Like you said, was it just that it just wasn't speaking to you anymore?
I'd be curious to read it now, because it's funny. When you read something, as a writer, now I'm sure other writers will agree with this and some won't, but as a writer, when I pick up a book that I read a long time ago, it's like, whoa, who wrote this? Oh, this is kind of good, or this really is bad. But it was set in the Victorian era. It was a biographical novel about Ellen Terry, who was a famous actress in the Victorian era, who married a very famous painter she was 16, and I believe he was 48 when they married. And it's quite a strange story. And I think I wrote it well, but I don't know. Maybe I'll pick it up again. We'll see. It wasn't where my heart was. I mean, as soon as I got to the 1950s, I felt right at home, and I wanted to write about it.
So if you guys have joined us late, we've been talking about with Jennie Fields about her newest novel, Atomic Love, that just came out Tuesday. If you missed the beginning part of the chat, once we're done, Facebook will archive it and you'll be able to watch it there. We'll also get it uploaded to the store's YouTube account in the next couple of days, in case you guys want to share it with anybody who is not on Facebook. We've got copies of Atomic Love in store, and as I mentioned earlier, Jennie was kind enough to send us signed book plates to go with them. So when you order a copy of it, we'll tuck a book plate in there for you. Jennie, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been a really wonderful chat. Congratulations on the new book.
Thank you, John. It's really been fun. You asked some terrific questions.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.